My mother pretended to be sick, just to trick me into signing the house transfer papers. My name is Sarah Jenkins. I am 48 years old, a high school history teacher in Austin, Texas. My life was not complicated. A job I loved, a good son named Leo, a sophomore in college, and warm memories of my late father in the house where I grew up. But the past 6 months have turned everything into a grueling mess, all revolving around the mysterious terminal illness of my mother, Eleanor. I have exhausted my energy and savings, put my own needs on hold, just to care for her. And then, just hours ago, I signed a damning piece of paper at the lawyer's office that she and her new financial advisor had appointed, believing I was doing the right thing to protect my mother's future. Now I was driving back to my mother's house, the house I'd always believed would someday be mine, the house my father had worked so hard to build, only because I'd absent-mindedly left my wallet on the kitchen table. It was a hot May day in Austin, but I felt a chill down my spine. There had been a vague sense of unease that had been creeping up on me since I'd left the law office, a feeling I'd tried to brush off as just fatigue and lingering tension. I parked the car a short distance from the house, not wanting the engine noise to disturb my mother's precious rest. I gently opened the back door with my own key, intending to sneak in, grab my wallet, and leave immediately. The house was strangely quiet. Usually at this hour, I would hear the TV on low or my mother's faint cough from the bedroom. But not today. Instead, as I tiptoed down the hall to the living room, I heard a sound that took me by surprise. Laughter. Not a faint giggle, but a full-bodied laugh. My mother's laugh. I stopped, ducking behind the wall, my heart pounding in my chest. Through the cracked door, I saw an unbelievable sight. My mother, Eleanor, who only hours before had been huddled in a chair in her lawyer's office, her voice low and her hands shaking, lamenting her last days, was now standing upright in the middle of the living room. She was wearing comfortable pajamas, pacing back and forth, the phone pressed to her ear, her face beaming with excitement. "I can't believe how easy it was, Gary." Her voice rang out, clear and strong, without the slightest sign of fatigue. "She signed right away. Just like you said, all it took was a few crocodile tears and a few words about her dead father. She's always had a soft spot for her father." My ears rang. Gary? Gary Sullivan, the financial advisor my mom had introduced me to a few months ago? Crocodile tears? My dad? My mother continued, her voice full of smugness. "This house is completely mine now. The books are clean. We can mortgage it now for investment capital. That money will help us live a much more comfortable life, right?" My mind was spinning. Mortgage? Investment? What the hell was going on? The paperwork I just signed, wasn't it supposed to simplify the process or protect assets? In my daze, the wallet slipped out of my hand and fell to the wooden floor with a dry thud. The chatter in the living room suddenly stopped. My mother turned, her smile frozen as she saw me standing frozen in the doorway, my face probably white with shock. The excitement on her face vanished, replaced by panic, then quickly turned into a cold, distant expression I had never seen before. In that moment, my world fell apart, and I realized, in the most painful and cruel way, that I was just a puppet in a play directed by my own mother. I had saved every penny, stayed up all night, put my own life on hold, only to stand here, listening to my own mother brag about how she had blatantly deceived me, taken away my father's house, my house. To understand this shock, you need to know about my complicated relationship with my mother. My mother, Eleanor, had always been a woman who needed attention. Even when my father was alive, she had played the role of the weak, the one who needed to be protected. My father, a strong, practical man, often indulged her, perhaps to keep the peace in the house. I always tried to please her, always feeling guilty if I did not meet her emotional demands, sometimes unreasonable. 5 years ago, my father died suddenly of a heart attack. His death left a huge void, not only emotionally but also in terms of family stability. My mother became even more dependent and complaining. She lived alone in a large house in a quiet Austin suburb, a house my father had personally renovated, filled with childhood memories of Leo and me. The house, according to current Austin real estate prices, was worth no less than $750,000. There was never a formal will about the house between my mother and I, but there was always an unspoken understanding that it would go to me, her only child. I also did not hesitate to spend nearly $20,000 of my savings over the past 3 years to fix her leaky roof and replace her entire old plumbing system. I did it out of love, out of responsibility, and because I believed I was investing in my own future. Then about 6 or 7 months ago, Mom's illness began. At first, it was just vague complaints of fatigue, unexplained joint pain, and occasional shortness of breath. I worriedly took Mom to see one doctor after another. Blood tests, x-rays, and even a CT scan showed nothing serious. The doctors said it could be due to age, stress after Dad's death, or just common degenerative symptoms. But my mother did not accept those explanations. She only focused on the worst possibilities, searched for information on the internet, and diagnosed herself with all kinds of serious illnesses. She refused to see the specialists I suggested, nor did she want to do more in-depth tests. She said that doctors nowadays only know how to make money, that she knows her body better than anyone. Gradually, she became increasingly weak, requiring care almost 24/7. She had difficulty walking, ate poorly, and her voice was always weak and weak. My life was turned upside down. I had to juggle schoolwork, ask my colleagues for help, and spend most of my weekends and evenings with my mother. I cooked, cleaned, and took her to physical therapy, which she always skipped because she was too tired. Leo visited her often, but he was busy with school, and I didn't want him to worry too much. The physical fatigue and mental pressure weighed heavily on me. Just when I felt most exhausted, Gary Sullivan appeared. Mom introduced him as a good friend, a retired financial expert who happened to meet at the seniors club, who was very kind and wanted to help Mom sort things out before it was too late. Gary was about 60 years old, well-dressed, soft-spoken, and tactful. He seemed very sympathetic to my mother's situation, often visiting, bringing fruit or cakes. To me, he always praised my filial piety about the sacrifice I had made for my mother. But beneath that trustworthy facade, Gary began to subtly instill fear. "Oh, Sarah, medical costs in America, especially end-of-life care, are astronomical," he would sigh. "And then there's the complicated inheritance and tax process. Eleanor is worried about you." He suggested that Mom's estate should be simplified now so that I would be able to manage it and avoid potential legal problems. At first, I was hesitant. I suggested that my mother make a clear will or a power of attorney for my medical and financial affairs. But my mother brushed me off. She started crying, saying that I didn't trust her, that I was doubting her love. "I just want things to be okay for you," she sobbed. "Can't you even fulfill my last wish?" Gary Sullivan added, "Transferring the house to Sarah now is the best way to protect the assets from potential future medical creditors. Think of it as a precautionary measure. Legally, it will give Sarah more leverage if she needs to borrow money to take care of Eleanor." He stressed that this is only a temporary procedure to comply with the law, a way to protect both mother and child. The pressure was mounting. My mother cried day and night, talking about her illness, about her impending death, about her desire to have peace at home. She said that only when the house was completely in my name could she close her eyes and pass away. I, a 48-year-old woman with a clear mind, was completely caught up in a spiral of fatigue, anxiety, and guilt. I was exhausted from balancing work, taking care of my mother, and taking care of my son away from home. And deep inside me, perhaps, was the fear of losing my mother, a fear that made me no longer clear-headed enough to think. Finally, I nodded in agreement. The day of the signing took place at the office of a lawyer Gary Sullivan had enthusiastically introduced. It was a small office, not very busy. The atmosphere in the room was tense. My mother sat in a chair, looking very weak, breathing hard, her hands shaking. Gary sat next to her, seeming to speak kindly, occasionally patting her hand. The lawyer, a man who seemed a little absent-minded, handed me a stack of papers. I glanced at the title, Quitclaim Deed. I had never heard of such a document before and felt a little uneasy. I asked what it was. The lawyer explained briefly that it was a quick and simple form of transferring ownership of real estate, often used between family members. Gary chimed in. "Yes, Sarah, this is the most efficient way to handle this situation." My mother took my hand, her eyes filled with tears as she looked at me pleadingly. "Do it, my child. For me, I don't want any trouble for you in the future." In a sleep-deprived, emotionally drained state, and fully convinced that I was doing the best thing for my mother, I signed that damn piece of paper. I signed my name to a document relinquishing all rights to my father's house, leaving it entirely in the hands of my mother, who I believed was on the verge of death. Just a few hours later, I stood frozen in the doorway of the living room, listening to my mother laughing loudly on the phone, bragging about her fraudulent victory. The truth was exposed, stark and cruel. I had not only lost my house, I had lost my mother. The initial shock quickly gave way to anger and utter pain. I walked straight into the living room, my footsteps heavy on the wooden floor. "Mom!" My voice was shaky but filled with indignation. Eleanor jumped, quickly hanging up. Her expression changed from panic to forced composure to hard defensiveness. "Sarah? Why are you here? You startled me." She tried to control her voice, to sound weak again. I was just talking to the doctor. He said there was some improvement." "What doctor would call you at this hour? And what doctor would make you laugh and pace around the room like that?" I demanded, my voice growing louder. "I heard it all, Mom. Heard you talking to Gary Sullivan. Heard you talking about crocodile tears, about tricking me into signing papers, about mortgaging this house." Eleanor paled, then flushed with anger. Her facade of weakness was gone. "You were eavesdropping on me?" she shouted, her voice a sharpness I had never heard before. "Eavesdropping? This is my dad's house. I have the keys. I just came back to get my wallet," I yelled back, tears starting to well up in my eyes, not from sadness, but from anger. "How could you do this to me? Fake an illness? Trick me into signing the papers, just for money?" "So what?" Eleanor raised her face, her shamelessness evident. "This is my house. I am your father's wife. I have the right to inherit it. You are just a daughter. Sooner or later you will marry. I have the right to do whatever I want with my property." "Mom's property?" I laughed bitterly. "This house is Dad's hard work. I spent money to repair it. Mom told me she was seriously ill, she was about to die. She took advantage of my love and filial piety." "I'm not faking it," she tried to salvage the situation. "I'm tired too. But Gary said this was the best way to secure my future. You have a job, you have kids, and what about me? A lonely old woman with no one to rely on. Gary Sullivan put you up to this?" I demanded, trying to find a glimmer of reason in this chaos. "He was just giving advice," Eleanor fumbled. "He said you were too soft, too trusting, and he was right." Just then, the front door opened, and Gary Sullivan walked in, holding a bouquet of flowers. He smiled in greeting, but the smile faded when he saw me and the tension in the room. "Oh, Sarah's here too? What's up, Eleanor?" "Ask her." I turned to Gary, pointing at my mother. "Ask her how you two conspired to trick me. Ask her who came up with this plan to fake an illness and take over the house." Gary looked fake confused. "Sarah, what are you talking about? We just want to help you and Eleanor. She's really weak." "So weak that you can laugh loudly and walk around the room discussing a mortgage plan right after tricking your daughter into signing the transfer papers?" I retorted, looking him straight in the eye. Gary was speechless, glancing at Eleanor for help. But Eleanor could only stand still, her face pale. "Get out of my house!" Eleanor suddenly shouted, pointing at the door. "Both of you get out! This is my house! I don't want to see your faces anymore!" She turned to me, her eyes filled with hatred. You unfilial son! You dare to doubt your mother! Get out!" I stood there, stunned. Thrown out of the house I had grown up in, by the mother I had cared for so much. The pain was like a knife stabbing into my heart. But with the pain came a cold determination that began to form. I would not let them be. I would not let them take away what was mine, what belonged to my father's memory. I turned and walked out the door without another word. Tears were still streaming down my cheeks, but a plan was forming in my head. The battle had only just begun. The first thing I did as soon as I got in the car was call Leo. He was in college, a few hours away from Austin. Leo was stunned by my broken voice and broken story. "Mom, are you serious? Grandma did what?" Her voice was filled with disbelief, then anger. "I can't believe it! I'll be right back." "No, Leo, you stay there and study. I need you to focus." I tried to calm myself. "But I need you to know what's going on. I'm not going to let this go." "Of course, Mom. We won't let her get away with this. I'm always here for you. Just tell me if you need anything." Leo's unwavering support was like a precious spiritual medicine. After hanging up, I sat in the car for a long time, trying to sort out my jumbled thoughts. I needed to act rationally. First, I tried calling the attorney who had signed the papers that morning. As I expected, he was very evasive. "Ms. Jenkins, I was only following the instructions of my client Eleanor. She was of sound mind and had full control over her assets at the time. The quitclaim deed was validly executed." He clearly wanted nothing more to do with it. I realized I needed a good attorney, one who specialized in civil litigation, especially fraud and property disputes. Through a colleague, I was referred to Ms. Diane Holloway, a lawyer in Austin with a reputation for being sharp and assertive. I called and was fortunate to get an appointment for the next afternoon. While I waited, I began to rummage through my memory, carefully recording every suspicious detail of my mother's 6 months of illness. The times she refused to go to a specialist, the times she forgot she was sick while watching her favorite TV show or having fun, Gary Sullivan's insinuating remarks about medical costs and complicated procedures. I remembered how my neighbor, Mrs. Henderson, a kind woman, had said to me, "I saw your mother in the garden yesterday, digging the soil and looking very well. I'm glad she's feeling better." At the time, I thought Mrs. Henderson was mistaken or that my mother was trying to do some light exercise. But now it was different. I decided to talk to Mrs. Henderson and the other neighbors. I also spent some time researching Gary Sullivan online. There was little information about him. There was no record of him being a licensed financial advisor. There were only a few posts on local forums warning of a well-spoken older man who preyed on older, single, wealthy women. My heart sank. My mother had fallen for a professional con artist, and worse, she had conned her own daughter. The next afternoon I sat in Ms. Diane Holloway's office. She was about 50 years old, with short, neatly cropped hair and sharp, intelligent eyes. I told her the whole story, from beginning to end, trying to remain calm, but my voice shaking and aching. I gave her my detailed notes. Ms. Holloway listened attentively, occasionally taking notes. When I finished, she looked at me, her eyes both professional and sympathetic. "Sarah, this is clearly a case of fraud and undue influence. Your mother used her falsified medical condition and mother-daughter relationship to pressure you into signing the property transfer papers under emotional duress and possibly with the complicity of Gary Sullivan." She further explained, "Our biggest difficulty is to prove your mother's intention to deceive and that she was of sound mind and capable of acting when she committed the act. The other side will certainly use the excuse that she is old, sick, or even blame you for putting pressure on her." "So what do we do?" I asked, my voice filled with hope, but also worry. "First," Ms. Holloway said, her voice firm, "we will send a formal letter of demand to your mother and Gary Sullivan, demanding the immediate revocation of the quitclaim deed on the grounds of fraud and undue influence. At the same time, we need to urgently gather more evidence." Ms. Holloway's strategy is clear. 1. get witness statements, talk to Mrs. Henderson and other neighbors who may have seen my mother well during her illness, get formal statements if possible. 2. Request medical records. Although my mother refused to undergo extensive medical examinations, records from previous examinations may show a lack of evidence of an actual terminal illness. This would strengthen the argument that she exaggerated or fabricated her medical condition. 3. Investigate Gary Sullivan. Dig deeper into his past. See if there are any other similar victims. In particular, investigate the financial relationship between him and my mother after the house was transferred. What did they do with the house? 4. Preparing to file a lawsuit. If they deny our request to cancel the contract, we will not hesitate to file a lawsuit in Travis County Civil Court. This fight won't be easy, Sarah, Ms. Holloway warned. It could be long and costly, both financially and emotionally. Are you ready? I took a deep breath. Images of my mother laughing and bragging about her deception flashed through my mind. Images of my father's house mortgaged by a stranger and my unfaithful mother. I'm ready, I said, my voice firm. I will do whatever it takes to get justice and my father's house back. Ms. Holloway nodded, a professional but encouraging smile on her face. Very well, let's get started. Leaving the law office, for the first time since my shock, I felt a glimmer of hope. The road ahead was long and difficult, but I was no longer alone. I had Leo, I had Ms. Holloway, and most importantly, I had the truth and justice on my side. As Ms. Holloway predicted, our request was ignored. The attorneys representing my mother and Gary Sullivan sent back a letter denying all allegations, continuing their tactics of blaming me for stressing my aging mother and greed for the property. They insisted that the transfer was completely voluntary and legal. Left with no other choice, Ms. Holloway filed a lawsuit on my behalf in Travis County Civil Court, alleging fraud, undue influence, and seeking to vacate the quitclaim deed. The legal battle officially began, followed by a grueling period of evidence gathering. During this time, I worked tirelessly with Ms. Holloway. I spoke with Ms. Henderson and 2 other neighbors. They all confirmed that they had seen my mother gardening, walking around the neighborhood, and even driving to the grocery store alone during the months she was supposedly bedridden. All 3 agreed to sign affidavits detailing what they had seen. This was the first valuable piece of evidence. The medical records, while not as complete as we would have liked, painted a clear picture. There was no diagnosis of a terminal illness or serious debilitating condition. There were only notes of subjective symptoms my mother described and normal test results. But the real twist in the case came from an unexpected direction. In the process of asking financial institutions for information regarding my mother's assets, Ms. Holloway made a shocking discovery. Just 3 days after I signed the transfer papers, my mother and Gary Sullivan went to a mortgage company and applied for a reverse mortgage on the home. They were quickly approved and took out a sizable initial down payment, about $50,000. And on the disbursement papers, there was a line item listed as a consulting fee paid directly to Gary Sullivan, $10,000. Bingo! Ms. Holloway exclaimed when she broke the news to me over the phone. This is the most damning evidence yet of a clear financial motive behind this whole fake illness drama. They're not protecting assets or simpling the process. They want cash, Sarah. They want to drain the value of the house immediately. This discovery completely changed the course of the case. It not only showed the intent to defraud, but also exposed Gary Sullivan's complicity and profiteering. Ms. Holloway immediately added this evidence to the lawsuit. Next came the deposition, where the parties, in the presence of their attorneys and a court stenographer, answered questions under oath. This was Ms. Holloway's opportunity to come face-to-face with my mother and Gary. Gary Sullivan's deposition came first. He entered the room with a false air of confidence, but quickly faltered under Ms. Holloway's pointed questioning. When asked about his financial expertise, he faltered, unable to provide evidence of his license or practical experience. When pressed about why the home flipping was so urgent, He repeatedly contradicted his testimony. And when Ms. Holloway presented evidence of the reverse mortgage and the $10,000 consulting fee he had received, Gary's face paled. He stammered, trying to explain that it was a legitimate service fee. But he couldn't hide his confusion and fear. It was my mother, Eleanor, who entered the room with a pained expression, trying to play the victim. At first, she stubbornly repeated her story of illness, of wanting to provide for her daughter. But when Ms. Holloway presented the testimony of the neighborhood witnesses, compared it with sketchy medical records, and especially when she presented evidence of the mortgage and the distribution of money to Gary just days after obtaining the documents, my mother began to waver. Ms. Holloway asked directly, "Ms. Jenkins, you said you just wanted to simplify the procedure for your daughter. So why did you immediately mortgage the house and give Mr. Sullivan $10,000? My mother was silent for a long moment, her eyes looking down at the table. Then she mumbled, I just wanted to secure my future. Gary said it was the best way." In a moment of loss, she almost admitted to the whole plan, though she still tried to blame Gary as the mastermind. My mother's attorneys repeatedly protested, but the damage was done. Gary's contradictory testimony and my mother's circumstantial admissions, combined with solid documentary evidence, created an extremely strong case against them. Realizing that the situation was increasingly unfavorable and that there was a risk of losing the lawsuit, losing everything, and even facing a criminal investigation for fraud, my mother's lawyer and Gary proactively proposed mediation. The mediation took place in a mediation office. The atmosphere was tense. I sat across from my mother for the first time since I had been evicted. She avoided my gaze, her face showing exhaustion and bitterness. But this time, perhaps for real. Gary Sullivan looked even more miserable, anxious and nervous. Ms. Holloway represented me, taking a tough and uncompromising stance. 1. Completely and immediately cancel the quitclaim deed. Title to the home must be returned in full to Sarah Jenkins. 2. My mother and Gary Sullivan are responsible for reimbursing me for all legal fees I have incurred throughout this lawsuit. 3. Any debt incurred from the reverse mortgage on the home is the responsibility of Eleanor Jenkins and Gary Sullivan, not me. After hours of intense negotiations, under the weight of irrefutable evidence and facing the prospect of a disastrous trial, my mother and Gary had no choice but to accept all the terms. The settlement was signed. A week later, I received a copy of the court papers confirming the cancellation of the quitclaim deed. The house was officially back in my name, Sarah Jenkins. Justice, however belated and painful, had finally been served. Holding the title deed in my hand, I stood at the doorstep of the house where I grew up. My feelings were mixed. There was an indescribable relief in knowing that the legal battle was over, that I had reclaimed what was mine. But there was also a deep sadness in my heart. Sadness for the irreparable breakdown of a blood relationship, for the emotional scar inflicted by my own mother. I walked into the house. Everything was as it had been when I had been evicted, but now it belonged to me. I decided that I needed to change this space, not only to erase the painful memories, but also to affirm my new beginning. I called in a painter and chose a brighter color. I rearranged the furniture, removing items that reminded me of my dark past, keeping my father's mementos and childhood memories. I made the house my own, a symbol of the resilience and inner strength I didn't know I had until I was pushed to the limit. Leo was with me throughout the entire process of cleaning and renovating the house. He didn't say much, but his presence and supportive hugs were invaluable. "I'm so proud of you, Mom," he said to me one evening as we sat in the newly painted living room. That simple statement brought tears to my eyes, but this time they were tears of relief and joy. As for my mother, Eleanor, the consequences of her actions were devastating. She lost her home, and the money she had taken out on the reverse mortgage, the bank is now pursuing that debt from her and Gary. Her relationship with Gary Sullivan fell apart shortly after the settlement was signed. He reportedly disappeared from Austin shortly thereafter. Eleanor faced isolation, shame, and real financial hardship of her own making. She had to move to a small rental apartment in another part of town, living on a small welfare check. I decided to keep my distance from her completely. No calls, no visits. The trust was completely broken, and I knew that trying to repair it would only bring more pain. Sometimes cutting it off is the only way to protect yourself and heal. It was a bitter but necessary lesson. My life is slowly getting back on track, but I am no longer the Sarah Jenkins I once was. I am stronger, more assertive, and have learned to set healthy boundaries, even with those closest to me. I am still a dedicated teacher and a loving mother to my son, but I now know my worth and will no longer allow anyone to take advantage of my kindness. I got my father's house back, my home, but the scars of my mother's betrayal will never fully heal. They remain, a constant reminder that sometimes the people who hurt you the most are the ones you love and trust the most. The journey to justice was painful, but it taught me a lesson about the strength that lies within each of us and the value of never giving up, never stopping fighting for what is right. Have you ever faced such a painful betrayal in your family? And what did you do to overcome it and find justice for yourself?